Logan, everybody, time for another episode of Michael's Record Collection. I'm very happy to have with me today recording artist Dave Kerzner. Dave, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
As you might notice from my background, we're here to talk about a very special album today, an album near and dear to your heart, Dave. Um, Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and I'm very excited to get into this with you. But first, I want to talk about you. You have a couple of solo albums that have come out in recent years: New World in 2014, Static in 2017. Do you have another one on the way soon?
I do, yeah,
You got a
and some
title
other
for it?
stuff. Uh, I haven't released the title for it, and I have this dilemma because I have another band project called In Continuum,
Hmm.
and I have songs that could be either on my next solo album or the next In Continuum album, and I've ping ponged back and forth because they have the same players on them. And I'm like, well, it's the players of In Continuum, but this really could be a solo album. But then again, it's probably a good and continuing album. I can't even decide. So at some point, I'm going to decide. But as Pink Floyd once said, you can't have your pudding if you don't eat your meat. So I have committed to a bunch of live albums for all those for my solo projects, but my for different lineups and in continuum and even Montravega, another project to have
Hmm.
uh, that are these like sort of compilation box sets with the live portion. And I gotta tell you that doing these live to the way that I like to do them is as much work as doing like a studio album. So but I'm not going to allow myself to indulge, even though I've worked on it for years, so I've got a lot of studio albums that can be released relatively quickly, but I'm just not going to do it until I finish the live albums, because that's what everyone does know the name of, and some have pre-ordered it or backed it with Kickstarter. So I'm
Hmm.
like, all right, I'm gonna get those done, and then as soon as that's done, I'm gonna explode with all this new original songs, studio albums. So
That sounds great. You mentioned Montravega. You had an album out in 2016 called The Illusions Reckoning. This is a project you did with Heather Finley, formerly of Mostly Autumn. Ari and Anthony Lucasen played on this. Irene Jansen and Troy Donockley. I mean, these are well-known musicians. Had to be a blast playing with those guys.
yeah, and David Kilminster from Roger
Hmm.
Waters' band
Yeah.
and Steve Wilson's band. Yeah, they're great, and that's through Heather. Really, I kind of adopted my UK York family. Alex Cromartie and Stuart Fletcher also ended up playing live with me and my band. And, it was kind of like a studio project because it was transatlantic like that. And we never did a live show together, but we kind of did one time in the Border Eyes. So we have that show recorded. So with a few liberties of me adding some keys that I would have added and some things if we had done it, Heather and I decided, like, why not as a one-off thing have what would be it's really the Heather Finley band with me sort of just engineering and adding some keys and
Hmm.
producing. But so that's another thing that I decided to do. It's a possibility of doing some new songs too, but she's pretty busy and I'm busy. But we talked about that too. But
Hmm.
it's just a little harder when it's transatlantic like that, and especially now with traveling, it's
Yeah, yeah.
almost impossible. I mean, even Simon Collins from Sound of Contact and I we're talking about working together, but it's like we like to work together in person, and that's just not that easy to happen right now. So whenever things ease up, you never know what'll happen. But I've got a full plate anyway of things to do. So
It sounds like you're very busy. And I just talked in February with another bandmate of yours, Billy Sherwood, about Arc of Life, which came out this year with Billy, Jay Shellen, John Davison, and Jimmy Hahn, and that must have been fun. And I know that Billy wanted to take that on the road when you guys can get out.
yeah, being part of that is cool. It's ironically, all these other projects are with me being, let's say, one of the lead songwriters and co-producer or producer of the project. That one, I'm not. I didn't write any of the songs on that
Hmm.
album. I'm just the keyboard player. I didn't produce it. So it's actually a relief. I mean, as much as I do like to do all that stuff, it's kind of fun to kind of learn and be part of something that's like got a captain. Billy's the captain pretty much of that band.
Yeah.
And so, if he says, hey, we're going on tour, I mean, to be honest with you though, I gotta say, like, they're crazy because they're the half that band, more than half the band is in Yes.
Yeah, I know.
And they're busy touring with Yes. And it's like, if I was touring with Yes, I wouldn't want to also tour with another band. I'd be like, I want to chill out at home until we tour again. But that's me. But fortunately for me, I don't tour much at all. So, if they want to tour all year round, that's their problem. But for me, I get to kind of, if we do it, it'll be a lot of fun because, and I love hanging out with those guys. I've worked with them in different capacities, except for Jimmy, and I really like Jimmy. I would totally work with him anyway, my kind of person. So just really nice guys, fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
So that'll be a good time. Plus, I got to learn. I can't reveal what we're going to play, but the plan, if we do live shows, when, pretty much when, is, let's just say this, I gotta be very careful. For Yes fans and for Chris Squire fans and for Billy Sherwood fans and for fans of Arc of Life and all the, let's say eras of Yes and different things, there's something special in the live show that would be worth coming out for, I think. And you're not going to get that from Yes, and because it's purposely not meant to be stepping on the toes of Yes, so it's like you go see a Yes show, you're going to see what they do, like Relayer and the new album and things like that. And then you go see this show and you see things you maybe thought you'd never hear. I don't know, so I'll just leave it at that, but it's going to be fun.
Well, that sounds intriguing, I would have to say. So we've established your credentials just from a musical standpoint, but you also have worked with a veritable who's who of artists with your sonic reality, music sampling, and your music software stuff. Who are some of the favorites that you've had over the years that you've worked with on that project?
Well, I mean, they're all, to me, they're all favorites, because if I worked with them, it was because I wanted to. I kind of, it's sort of, my company Sonic Reality's been around since the 90s. It's been a labor of love since the very beginning. I started it because I collected keyboards, vintage keyboards and instruments. And then I was like, well, I've collected them. What should I do with them? And I'm like, well, I'll sample them so that other people can use them, because they're very hard to find. So I sampled the instruments for Roland and Alesis for these vintage expansion cards. And then later you could do your own sample library. So I created Sonic Reality. And then years later, Tony Banks from Genesis uses Sonic Reality, and IK Multimedia, which is the bigger company that makes the software plugins now that house those sounds and more. And Keith Emerson, rest in peace. Neil Peart, we sampled Neil Peart from Rush, also rest in peace. Really sad, some of the people that we worked with. We were very lucky, especially in retrospect, of them not being around anymore, just to meet them and to work with them. It was fascinating. Nick Mason from Pink Floyd, Alan Parsons, so many. And it's, been just awesome. And Ken Scott, who recorded the Beatles, and David Bowie, and these are, and Nick Davis, of course, and Hugh Padgham. So the guy, but two producers for Genesis, producer engineers. And these have been kind of mentors for me, just because, hanging out with them and working with them and being so interested, because I've always been interested in the production side as much as actually the playing side and being on stage. As the behind the scenes was, the album credits kind of, like who's responsible for this? Who got that drum sound? How'd they do it? So I've recorded at Genesis Studio and dissected, with them and the engineers, exactly what mics they use, which I now own a lot of those mics from the studio, along with the keyboards, which but and just learn from the masters, like how to produce records and how to get certain sounds and their approach to all those great classic albums. And so through Sonic Reality, without even having that as an intention per se of I'm going to use this to like work with my heroes, it was never that intention, but it ended up actually because the tools that I've made with Sonic Reality and also helped with IK Multimedia happen to be the kind of tools that musicians and producers from so many genres use. but a lot of my hero, like I helped John Paul Jones with Mellotron sounds for Them Crooked Vultures tour and had a whole conversation with him. He's in my phone. I can't just call him randomly, but like he's in my little Rolodex, you know? So, I mean, it's been just incredible. And like I said, these are the masters. These are my teachers. And just to, it's not just a novelty to me. I just respect them and I don't like to be a pest and bother them, but the times that I've had with them have been very useful. I've learned a lot in the process.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit why you're the perfect person to talk about Genesis now. You've played The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with Kevin Gilbert, or at least a good chunk of it at was it Progfest '94, I believe.
Yeah.
It's a 20-year anniversary of The Lamb. You have worked with Simon Collins, son of Phil. You've worked with Steve Hackett on Genesis Revisited. I mean, your credentials are there. You mentioned the keyboards. Tell me a little bit about the Tony Banks keyboards you've been hashtagging about on Facebook.
Well, okay, so it all started actually years ago. I'll do a short version summary. So I played The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with Kevin Gilbert and I played keys, and Nick DiVirgilio was on drums, Stan Cody on guitar, who works at Fender, and Dan Hancock on guitar. Stan on bass and guitar, the Rutherford part. And so in '97, I believe it was, you know, the early days of the internet, Genesis had announced they were looking to replace Phil Collins. Drums and vocals, and they were doing auditions. So I recommended Nick DiVirgilio online in a news group. And it turns out that Nick Davis, their producer, who I'm now friends with, but I wasn't at the time, saw that, and it helped Nick get the audition. And I said, like, I played The Lamb with him. He's amazing. He's on tour with Tears for Fears, so he's a pro, you know. And so he got the gig. Actually, he got the audition, and then, you know, he got the gig. Playing half the drums on the album, along with Nir Z, who I don't know, but I've met him since. A very nice guy. And Ray Wilson, who I also am friends with now, and he's a really nice guy as well. And I thought they did a great job. You know, that album is not my favorite Genesis album, I'm not saying, but it was still, it had potential, actually. A lot of people feel like they could have done something, but it's tough shoes to fill, no pun intended.
Right.
But in any case, I was so shocked. You know, Nick's wife, Tiffany, had called me or messaged me or something like that. And she said, "Did you say something on some forum or something or whatever about Nick?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, he got the gig." You know, they mentioned that. And I'm like, "Really?" And so I went on the forum and I said, "You know, I just want to say that, you know, Nick DiVirgilio, you know, I posted it and they saw that. So somebody from Genesis camp is reading this, and I think that's amazing." And then Nick Davis private messaged me and he said, "That's not that amazing." And I'm like, dude. So I made friends with him. Nick Davis ended up mixing Sound of Contact's Dimension out for us.
Great album.
And thank you. And that was incredible. Talk about, I mean, I learned so much from watching every movie made. And it's funny, we offered him a chance to co-produce the album. Simon Collins and I co-produced it. We said, "You want to co-produce it with us? Because, I mean, you know, you're the one who, you know, produced XTC, Genesis Marillion." And he was so cool. He was like, no, you guys are doing a good job. If I'm listed, people are going to just think it's me. So I'll just mix and you guys produce. I mean, I'll never forget that. That's like class. Anyway, but I learned from him. And anyway, long story short, I worked at the farm a bunch of times with Nick sampling instruments and stuff. And then also some sessions even with Colin Edwin from Porcupine Tree and a bunch of stuff when they were allowing sort of outside sessions for a little window of time. And, you know, I'm friends with Tony. You know, I met Tony, and I'm friends with Steve Hackett. Like, I can go out to dinner with Steve Hackett. I don't go out to dinner with Tony, but I've talked to Tony. He likes me, he knows who I am, and, you know, that's how it is. But I'm friends with his tech, Jeff, and their tour manager, Pud. So when I was there last, and I was pulling out keyboards, his classic keyboards from the back, and I'm like, "Oh, where's the Mellotron Mark II?" And Jeff's like, "Oh, yeah, we sold that." I'm like, "You sold that?" And I'm like, "Dude, next time you sell something, please let me know. You know, I'd totally be interested." And, you know, it's funny, like, you say these things, and I said it almost slightly in jest, but like, I remember being at a studio called Ocean Way, and I said to Rush's A&R man, "Hey, you know, if Neil Peart ever wants to do a drum sample library, let me know. And I was almost kidding. And he did. He said, you know what, you still want to do that drum library? So this is what happened. They contacted me first because it was on their mind, like, you know, who'd like this? They're downsizing. They have home studios now. They're not really using the farm anymore.
Yeah.
And they were just clearing out the warehouse of stuff, you know. And so they're like, you know who would love this? Dave. And they, you know, I saw a short list of people. It wasn't a public thing. It was all people they knew and worked with. It's like I was on an email thread, and it was like maybe 7 or 8 people, and I was one of them. And I was fast. I was like, yeah, I'll take this. And then I'm like, I can't afford to borrow. I was borrowing money anyway, but I'm like, there's only so much you can borrow. So I got a few producer friends of mine to get a few other things. And then even then, one of them bought the Hammond organ that he used on the Lamb. I'm like, why did I not buy that? But I'm sampling. So I got his ARPs, his Mellotron, the RMI, you know, a bunch of stuff. So I maxed out my credit to get all this stuff. But, you know, they were, and then Jeff said something really amazing. Jeff Collingham, Tony's tech. And he said, I can't imagine it going to a better person. I mean, not as if a good person, but like an appropriate person, because he knows that I'll use it. It's not going to just be like some rich guy's like mantle and some, you know, glass.
Right. Yeah. It's not a conversation piece for you.
No, I mean, it is, but it's also just like, hey, I'm going to write new songs with it, even, and use it on tributes. And so it would be good in the hands of somebody who was doing a tribute thing, but I'm doing a tribute album. I don't play in a tribute band, but I write new music. So it'll get used, it'll get kept, and you know, and I'm even doing a tribute to the Lamb, by the way. So it's another reason that I'm doing a special sort of film score-ish, you know, meets rock album version of it, like with an orchestra mixed with full band. And
well, so, that's great. I mean, you've said you've worked with Nick DiVirgilio in the past. Nick has done the Lamb in his Rewiring Genesis project, plus, you know, playing on the Giraffe stuff. And, you know, I can't think of a more appropriate person to talk about this record. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Why this album, Dave?
Well, first of all, interesting, since you brought that up, the whole reason I'm doing my own version of the Lamb is because Nick did Rewiring Genesis, and they didn't use keyboards. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's bold. I said, but it doesn't have the lambience. You know, it's good. He did a good job. And actually, Tony Banks likes it a lot.
Oh, yeah?
And the whole story about, oh, yeah. Like, Tony heard it later on, didn't even know that Nick sang. And then through Nick Davis, they told me that had they known that Nick DiVirgilio could sing, because he didn't audition for vocals back then. He didn't even sing lead with Spock's Beard yet.
Right.
That he might have gotten the whole gig replacing Phil Collins on vocals and drums. And I told Nick that, and Nick was like, "Oh, well, he's got such a good attitude. You can't." I wasn't trying to bum him out or anyway, but I was trying to like tell him, like, dude. He's like, "Well, I'm just happy I got to play with them at all, whatever." And I don't know if he like, you know, when it's told through 2 people, it kind of feels like maybe it's not exactly accurate. But then apparently Nick Davis and Tony Banks went to go see him play drums with Cirque du Soleil, and they went out to dinner with him, and they told him themselves exactly what I told him. So, you know, by the way, and he must have been just beside himself, like, what? But anyway, when he did Rewiring Genesis, and he had a few other things that he and Mark Hornsby, the co-producer, that had some tracks like In the Cage with the London Philharmonic or something, and some other things. I'm like, oh, like, don't just release it as a bonus track. I'll license all your tracks. I'll add keys. I'll have Francis Dunnery sing. I'll have some other people from early, you know, Steve Rothery, and I'll just do another version of it. And so I did. So I actually built my Lamb off. So it's Nick DiVirgilio on drums and Martin Levac on other drum tracks that were done differently. Sometimes they did like a bluegrass-ish version of Slipperman, and we weren't going to do that. Like I kind of, you know, I consulted with Francis Dunnery from It Bites, who's the singer, is the rail of the thing. And he's like, no, I don't want to do the bluegrass version. I want to do, you know, more traditional version. So we had Martin play a traditional version of that, and some of the other songs too.
Mhm.
But other than that, it's the a lot of the orchestral stuff, some released, some not, and Nick on drums with me on keys. And I even got some of the guys from Giraffe to
Oh,
join as well, as kind of like a reunion, for the love of Kevin and the
yeah.
Lamb and all that stuff. So it's a labor of love. I've been working on it for over 10 years, but we're going to release it either this year, probably this year actually, because of
Okay.
Genesis. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's us talking about the Lamb itself. What do you want to know? I
All right.
love the Lamb.
Favorite Genesis album?
I would say probably yes.
Yeah. Favorite album?
It's in the top 10 favorite albums of all time. I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't really rate albums like that and stuff. And as much as I love the Lamb, I could criticize it too.
Mhm.
Like it's a little cryptic. I think Gabriel did a brilliant job, but he's a little bit sort of out there, and it's not like you open it up and it explains it. That
Yeah.
would have been cool when you open it up and like there's a stick in my eye or whatever. It's like even more. Like, okay, maybe I won't get the answers from that. But as a work of art, it's brilliant, and it is full of incredible melodies and great chord changes from Tony and cool sounds and killer drumming. Phil Collins, it's like it's whenever I see anybody sort of get on Phil Collins' case because he's a pop star and all this other stuff, I'm like, and you're a Genesis fan, it's like, just don't forget, this is like one of the best drummers of all time in rock. And the
Yeah.
stuff that he did, it's like, forever preserved in these great albums. And it's like, don't be too hard on the guy. I mean, he gave us these albums with such amazing and his backing vocals with Peter Gabriel. That's another thing about this album that I love, is you hear a lot of Phil blending with Peter Gabriel, like Carpet
Hmm.
Crawlers. Every song on this album is amazing.
Yeah. It's let's get into this a little bit. It's the sixth Genesis studio album, falls between Selling England by the Pound and A Trick of the Tail. It was released on November 18th, 1974 on Charisma and Atco Records. Conceived and written during 3 months at the historic Headley Grange, where Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, Bad Company have all been. Um, from May to July 1974, recorded at Glasspant Manor in Wales from August to October 74, co-produced by John Burns and Genesis. Burns started working with Genesis on Foxtrot and co-produced the next three albums, Selling England, Genesis Live, and The Lamb. Engineered by David Hutchins. Sleeve design and photography by Hypnosis, very iconic cover, as you can see behind me. Personnel, Peter Gabriel, his last album with Genesis, lead vocals, flute, and what they call experiments with foreign sounds. Steve Hackett, acoustic and electric guitars, Mike Rutherford, bass and 12-string guitar, Phil Collins, drums, percussion, vibraphone, backing vocals, second lead vocal in Counting Out Time, Supernatural, Anesthetist, and Colony of Slippermen, and Tony Banks. Hammond T102 organ, RMI 368 Electra piano and harpsichord, Mellotron M400 ARP Pro soloist synthesizer, Elka Rhapsody string synthesizer, and piano. Did I get everything there?
I think so. Or 2600, that's also on the record. Somebody
Okay.
played it.
And Brian Eno was a guest on this with something called Enosification of Vocal Treatments on In the Cage and the Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging. So some chart success for this album. It was number 10 in the UK albums chart. It was number 41 on the Billboard 200, number 15 in Canada, 24 in New Zealand, and number 80 in Australia. It went gold in the United States, the UK, France, and Canada. This album had 3 singles off of it, 1 in the US and 2 in Europe. And you mentioned the story. The basics of it, I guess, are Rail's journey of self-discovery and identity, but it's a very opaque and hard to follow story, I guess, is a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, side note, you look like you popped out of the album cover. There, there you are, 3D. Um, yeah. So story wise, I wouldn't say that I'm like the expert on interpretation, and to a certain extent, I kind of with certain bands, especially progressive rock bands, and especially Genesis, actually, when the lyrics are kind of just not uh, clearly painting the picture for me. Um, which, for better or worse, when I write lyrics, I tend to do that. It's very accessible. There may be metaphors and things like that, but it's not so cryptic that you can't kind of make your own version out of it. With with Genesis and Yes, Purple Wolfhounds and whatnot, um, there's a bit of kind of like I'd leave it to be vague and enjoy the melodies and the phrases and kind of get my own sort of vague sense of the story, without thinking about, let's say, too much detail about he goes to see a doctor, the doctor castrates him, puts his pecker in a little tube, and then a raven sweeps. I mean, it's a weird story. Like, even
Yeah.
I don't need to think about that. I'm just enjoying the music at that point, but to a certain extent, and then but there's this kind of. I mean, I was even just listening to the Lamia the other day, which is one of the most beautiful songs, and technically speaking, what's happening in that song, it's kind of gross, like these snake beautiful women, sirens come after him, and then somehow he's got garlic like vampires, and they're all dead, and then he takes his flesh, he's going to put it in his backpack for food, his chocolate fingers. I mean, this is like, damn, this is, wow, what the hell's going on here? But that's if you're sitting there and really dissecting the lyrics, no pun intended, and like really kind of thinking about it. But to me, it's what's beautiful about music, especially progressive rock music, where there's a lot going on. There's a lot of layers of music, layers of lyrics and meaning and different things. You can kind of focus on that or not focus on it and just kind of get the overall adventure vibe of it. And he's going through these things, and then you could stop and sort of like think almost like with the other side of the brain, like what's going on, like what's the deal with his brother John? Is it really him?
Yeah.
Or what, all those kinds of things, and the metaphors and whatnot. I mean, even like it's only not gonna know all. I mean, I'm skipping to the end here, but I like it. I mean, I don't really know what he means, if he's just trying to say, I don't know. I don't know if I even want to know.
Yeah.
But I like it. So it's just kind of Peter Gabriel being out there, and yet he's brilliant. So it's like I said, some of it becomes sort of abstract art. And I think also, by the way, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think the other members of Genesis who didn't write it almost kind of feel the same way. They're sort of like, I don't know what it's about, really. I don't know what because they didn't really, so, and it's strangely, actually, I mean, I'm surprised some of them, I won't say who, but it's not really their favorite album, or it's one of their least favorite albums. And it's like, well, maybe because it was personal for them and the difficult times and all that stuff that's attached to it. You can't imagine what it's like to be in their shoes. But I remember sort of saying, like, are you kidding me? This is a masterpiece. I think I was talking to Nick Davis or somebody about it. And I'm like, this is, but it is. And it's very different from all their other albums. And, I was thinking another thing about The Lamb recently, just like, because I've been really, I mean, I've listened to Genesis for years, but lately, because I have Tony's keyboards, I've been heavily like really listening to every album from Trespass to, let's say, Abacab. And, focusing on different things like the sounds and just listening to it in the car and stuff. And I was thinking about how The Lamb had kind of evolved into a mature album for them. They had kind of, just built sophistication in what they were doing. And even though Selling England is maybe one of their best sounding albums from a production standpoint. And the Lamb is a little rough around the edges because they recorded with a mobile studio. Ironically, I have 2 channels of what they use, the Helios, for that Headley Grange studio. But I think they used the Rolling Stones mobile truck, and it was a big project, especially back then, to do a double album. And then with Peter leaving, I think it's a little, there's some trade-offs in the production, but in terms of the, it sounds good anyway, but it's a little bit sort of not as crystal clear as Selling England or Trick of the Tail after it. But it still sounds gritty and atmospheric, and the whole kind of, everybody sounds great on it, and everybody's kind of come into their own. And of course, Peter Gabriel as well. Like that's his best work with Genesis besides Supper's Ready. I think he probably thinks as well.
Yeah.
And it's so, like, I was thinking, not that every Genesis fan hasn't thought this, but like, what if they had carried on? Yeah. Like, what album would they have made Trick of the Tail with Gabriel? Maybe. Or would they have kind of evolved into, like, what would have been the next thing after the Lamb with Peter and Steve together with the band? And it's like, well, we'll never know. But the like I said, the combination of Phil and Peter's vocals, that's serious magic. And just everything about that album is super cool. The sounds, Tony. I mean, he really just, by that point, just became, because I mean, Selling England was the first time he really just started using synths. Because he didn't really have it before then, but he had the ARP, and then he evolved the ARP, because, like I said, I think there's Ravine is an ARP 2600. There's some other things. I don't know if I don't think he owned one yet, but and I have one of his ARP 2600s now, and the one he kept is Rev 2's serial number 0001. They gave him the first one of the next Rev, and that's probably the one he used on maybe Wind and Wuthering would be the first time. But anyway, some great synth work and keyboard work on that album. I mean, there were on the previous albums too, but like, I don't know, just the whole thing kind of came together for this album.
Yeah, a lot of jamming on this album, leading to a lot of what they did, and it kind of bears out in some of the longer songs on the record. Starts off with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, title track. It was a U.S. single, but it did not chart. It did receive FM radio play. The single had Counting Out Time on the flip side, and it right away it's a different sound for Genesis. The keyboard intro, the piano intro, right away this is nothing that they've ever done before.
What was fascinating to me, though? It's so true. Yet I have the box sets, which are amazing. I love all that kind of stuff. And they had some early recordings that I think had like early version of Anyway or some other Lamb stuff. And you're like, he had some of those ideas as early as 1970 or 69 or something.
Yeah.
And that's surprising, because it does actually seem like they just evolved into this kind of, with the Lamb, talking about the song The Lamb, you've got this real kind of classical piano beginning. And, even though you have that sort of thing in some ways with, Firth the Fifth before it, this was different. This was really kind of darker, more intense. And he's doing this cross-handed thing that he had kind of come up with, or I think he was influenced by another band, Procol Harum possibly, but either way, I just recently read that actually, but and I've never asked him, but either way, it's got his kind of signature, became a signature thing that he does, because he uses it on carpet crawlers as well, and so arpeggiated things and these runs, and then of course, it's an interesting thing, because when you have a progressive rock band like Genesis, of course, back then, I don't know what they called it or thought of it, art rock, or they just were influenced by, I don't know, Yes, Gentle Giant, King Crimson, the other bands that were doing that. It was like, oh, okay, in England especially, like, now is the time to kind of bring in some classical and be eclectic and whatever, and mellotrons and just go for it. But with all of them writing, they had this kind of like, Victorian English themes and kings and, all that's kind of, regal hogweeds and all this kind of like lore and Lord of the Rings, whatever, like just all that kind of stuff. And when Gabriel said, hold on a minute, can I just write the lyrics for this album? And they were probably like, well, no, but okay, I guess, they probably they like to write the lyrics too, or some of them did. Tony did, certainly. Yeah. And so they let him write the lyrics, and for better or worse, but like it resulted in this, edginess that they never had. Yeah. Maybe a little on Supper's Ready, but this was just like, the Sawdust Kid spits out his scorn and all this kind of like, even starting with the Lamb, know that you're in for a ride that's just not what you're used to. It's not, kings and queens and all that kind of stuff. This is like, some punk kid with an aerosol can and, weird shit's going to happen. And, but that's part of what's great about it.
Yeah. Did you have it on vinyl back in the day?
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah. Actually, I had Mark Hornsby actually gave me the vinyl, and I framed it. I have it on the wall. I can't really show you, but it's right there on the wall. But yeah, I had it back in the day, and I have the CD, and I have the box set, and I have every version, I guess, that exists.
Yeah, same. So the first side one, as I mentioned, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Fly on a Windshield, Broadway melody of 1974, Cuckoo Cocoon, In the Cage, and the Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging. Do you have a favorite from side one?
I love it all. But In the Cage is obviously just, well, no, I can't. I love it all. In the Cage, obviously, as a keyboard player, like I listen to things as just a listener, just a music lover, as a songwriter to be inspired or whatever, to understand it from a appreciation of songwriting, as a producer, as a keyboard player. But and I play other instruments too, but my main instrument has always been keyboard. So I remember when I was a kid and I had classical lessons, and I'll be short with this, don't worry. But and I fired, I got my family, all my family members we were all taking lessons from this stiff, and we were like, this guy sucks, can we just, and we fired him. And then I found this, or my mom found this teacher who was younger, and he would teach me anything. And one of the first things I said when I auditioned him to teach me, I said, would you be willing to listen to something, figure it out, and teach me how to play it? And the first thing was In the Cage solo from the Three Sides Live, though. But, I said, can you learn that and show it to me? And he was great because he learned it and then explained it to me. He's like, what he's doing there is like he's doing a lot of diminished scales and stuff. So he would explain the theory behind it, and that helped. I was like, oh, really? And he's like, it sounds crazy, but it's really just diminished. This is the I'm like, oh. So I guess as a keyboard player, I would have to pick In the Cage. But then again, that whole little suite there from Lamb Lies Down on Broadway to Broadway Melody is one of my favorite things of all time. So
yeah, it's incredible bass in this. Steve Hackett's work is great, and I think for me, In the Cage is my favorite from side one, but it's my favorite from the entire album. I love the way that it just builds in intensity and builds and builds and builds, and that it just gets really intense as it goes along. And I don't know what the lyrics mean, but it's really cool.
That's the summary of the whole album.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Cool. Yeah, I agree.
Anything stick out for you on Fly on a Windshield? For me, it's got to be that heavy sound. It's a sound. I think this is maybe the heaviest Genesis ever got back then with that lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it's reprised kind of with Lily White Lilith, but yeah, it's pretty heavy. I mean, I love it was fun playing that. I realized when we did the Lamb in '94, celebrating the 20th anniversary of it then, and I used all the keyboards I had, between Kevin Gilbert and I, we had the keyboards. So I had Kevin's Novatron, and I used my ARPs, and we used Keith Emerson's Hammond B3, which isn't even the C3. It's not the right organ, but it was an amazing organ. And I had, an RMI and stuff. And the way you play that, there's no MIDI. So like you don't, MIDI is a protocol where you can connect one keyboard to another keyboard digitally and play more than one sound from one keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
Tony does that now. But back then, each instrument, that's why you had a stack of keyboards around you, like I have, you can see a little bit here.
Yeah.
But then you really had to. So you had a Mellotron that did the Mellotron sound. You had the RMI, like the ones you mentioned. So to play that song, you had the RMI going through a phase 100 and the Mellotron, and you had to play the chords together at the same time. Totally fun. And also each one has a pedal, a volume pedal, so you can kind of mix yourself. And by the way, that's kind of partially how I got the nickname Squids, because hands and feet, it's like tentacles, like a octopus or squid. So but I really had to do it like Tony did. I mean, have to. I could have used MIDI keyboards, but I'm like, if I'm going to do the lamp, I might as well bring out the, it's why I collect this stuff. It's like, this is a chance to use it.
Yeah.
And it was great. But so that, and the other thing I like about Genesis is, even if, let's say, some of the songs, instrumental bits came from jams, they were into composing the instrumental sections, right, more than other bands that left it just like as a jam. And I like improv and I like jams, but there is a sort of reward for taking the time to mm-hmm. compose and refine it and be like, okay, this is, and then this way it's kind of like there's certain lines that you're going to hear live, and certain chord progressions that are like, well, that's the song. With Genesis, that's the song. With other bands like King Crimson, it could change or whatever, but with them, it was like, no, we've arrived at the melody. First to fifth is almost always like that. Maybe there's a little bit of section in the guitar solo to change a little, but so same thing with that. That said, when we did the tribute, this new tribute, well, I think when we did the original Lamb in '94, I think Dan played note for note, more or less. On the new one, I had Dan play it note for note, and then I had Francis Dunnery, who's not a note for note kind of guy. He's more adventurous. Not that Dan isn't, if I told him, but he basically refused to play it note to note, note for note, and he just did his own crazy version. And it does work because Francis is brilliant, and he just kind of gets Genesis in a way that very few people do, vocally, everything else. So, but then he adds his own little flavor. And probably Steve Hackett, I think, these days when he does it, he's the guy. So he knows what to do to be like the original, and then where to go off a little bit and do something new with it. But either way, I agree with you, man. That is a very powerful song. You get that quiet creeping up, hovering like a fly, and then all of a sudden, boom,
bam,
that moment. And there's another thing I like. I like the obvious stuff, which is that moment, which like every Genesis fan, if you're watching that, I mean, almost every, and you hear that and you're like, that's just a payoff of like, oh, that's epic. But one of the esoteric things I like about that is this drum fill where Phil goes, bum, 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 like that. And whenever that happens, and I actually, like when we were playing it back with Nick back in the day, and you didn't do that, I'm like, oh, no, you got to do that. Like, down. It's like, oh, okay.
That's great. I find that people that aren't into the older proggier Genesis that just kind of came forward with the hits in the 80s, they struggle with songs like The Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging. What is it about that song that really kind of sticks out for you as a musician?
Well, I mean, it's like down the rabbit hole, like even myself, I learned, my first Genesis album was Duke. And then I got Abacab and Three Sides Live. And then I went backwards from there. And I'm like, oh, and then number 3 kind of has a little bit of it. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is starting to change. And then I had Seconds Out. And that's where I learned the Gabriel era songs first, with Phil singing them. Then when I heard, like, I loved Supper's Ready on Seconds Out. And when I heard the original version, I was shocked at first. I was like, why is he singing it like that? I'm really so far from, like, yeah, it's sung like so different on Seconds Out. But then once you just, like it's an acquired taste, once you really understand Peter Gabriel era Genesis, if you want to call it that, and his approach to it, then it's just like, yeah, he's weird. He's weirder than Phil. But
Yeah.
that's one of the things that was the novelty about the band. He wore fox heads and dresses, and it was a whole other thing. So that's a big pill to swallow if you're into the hits. It may not be something that's just you jump right into. But like probably the more the songs that they've played with Phil are a little bit more not accessible per se, but a little bit more like likely for fans of the later eras to like and to understand and be familiar with. Grand Parade is like a deep cut on an album with weird Gabriel stuff, and it's a weird song. I love it. I think it's another one of those songs that just killer drums that builds up and then parade, and it's just in context of the album, it's one of the cool things about Genesis back then is when they took you on a journey, they were very influenced by the Beatles. So like things like, let's say, I Am the Walrus, where you had all these beautiful songs, Eleanor Rigby, and then all of a sudden you just had wackiness,
Yeah.
Tomorrow Never Knows or whatever. And you had, or Revolution Number 9, that's Waiting Room inspiration, I'm sure, but so you have these songs that kind of Willow Farm, that like you had all these beautiful lush things, and then you got this moment of just, chaotic wackiness. And it was a cool thing in the same way that it was for Beatles albums, but even sort of taking it to another level with Genesis, where you had this dichotomy of this wacky moment of craziness, and then it goes to something really beautiful. But then again, like movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory had that kind of thing, and certain, probably Alice in Wonderland, and where you just had total, abstract weirdness, and then it takes you to just in context. I think it works really well.
Mm-hmm.
And Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging, I've always thought of doing a song like that for Kevin Gilbert's Shaming of the True. And I wrote a song, I never released it, and I played it for Kevin, and he was like, no. But I thought it was kind of cool, like this idea of packaging albums as like, you're just a product, and you're an artist, and you're just a product to us, or the grand, like mindless packaging of just doesn't matter what it is, we just dress it up and put it out there. So I always like that song in that concept of thinking of like consumerism and all this stuff or whatever. But once again, I don't really know what Gabriel meant or what it means in the context or whatever per se. I just kind of get this vibe of like it's part of the journey, a little wacky moment of Oompa Loompas or something, right?
Yeah. And it has some of that. It has some of that British humor in it too. That is unique and that flavors earlier songs like "Get 'Em Out by Friday" and things like that. So it's a band that was really good at putting together a track list, because they, if you were feeling a little bit, ambivalent at the end of the Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging, you flip that record over and they crush you with Back in New York City.
That's another aggressive one.
Yeah.
That's maybe as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than Fly on a Windshield, actually.
Yeah, it's another rocker, and then they kind of go a little bit all over the place on side two. They go into Hairless Heart, which is a softer number, where I think Hackett really kind of shines, and Counting Out Time, which is again back to the humor that they do so well, and then the Carpet Crawlers, which again is a slower kind of a almost it's just kind of hard to explain that one, but it's slow. It's not a ballad, but it's
ballad.
Yeah,
it's a weird ballad.
It is a weird ballad, yeah. And then the Chamber of 32 Doors, which is interesting and very melodic in the verses. I really like the verses to that one. Do you have a favorite on side two? I know you say you don't pick favorites, but
I mean, it may be a tie between Back in New York City and Carpet Crawlers. I'm not my least favorite song on the whole album is probably Counting Out Time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little too goofy. Gonna take a look. It's just kind of like, I get it, but it's just sort of hokey, and it's meant to be, but
Yeah.
and it's okay. I mean, it's still great. You know, it's
Zip a
still,
zip whippy.
yeah, it's just out there, and sometimes it's a little too much for me. So like that is just sort of like, but then it could be like a British humor thing, and I'm not British, or I don't know. But I mean, I get the humor of it. I just think it's
Mhm.
just kind of, it's okay. I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't play it when we played it live. Kevin hated that song. I don't hate it, but and I like the guitar solo. That's with the unification, I guess, too.
Yeah.
Or
That's,
he used the, if not, he used the Cynthia Hi-Fi. That's what it was. Steve. Yeah. But and Hairless Heart is cool with that, uh, uh, backwards guitar sounding volume pedal stuff that he did. We got Steve Rothery to play our version of it, which was cool, and I
oh,
think
nice.
Back in New York City is a killer tune. And Carpet Crawlers. I mean, Carpet Crawlers, I love that they've been doing Carpet Crawlers, you know, um, on the last tour, maybe even hopefully again. I don't get tired of that song. It's just a beautiful song, and it kind of, one of the most underrated things I think from Genesis is when they did a new version in 1999 of that song,
Yeah.
which I like. And it was
Mhm.
weirdly done with Trevor Horn and not all being a bit whatever, but still, this everyone had been saying like we want to hear them reunite and do something. It's like, well, that's as close as they got,
Yeah.
at least as far as something. I mean, more or less. I mean, just the fact that Gabriel's singing Genesis again with them, and that
Mhm.
it's got Gabriel and Phil singing, that's underrated to me, and I like that version. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the Carpet Crawlers 1999 is the version you mentioned. It was put together for Turn It On Again, the hits compilation, and it's the last studio recording of any Genesis configuration to date.
Is it really? Holy
Yeah,
cow! Well, that's kind of cool in a way.
yeah, it's
I didn't
absolutely
think about
cool.
that.
Carpet Crawlers and Counting Out Time were both singles in Europe. Counting Out Time had Riding the Scree as the B-side. It reached number 53 in the UK, number 45 in Belgium, and number 64 in France. Carpet Crawlers went to 54 in the UK, and the B-side was a live version of The Waiting Room, and in parentheses, Evil Jam,
Damn,
uh,
yeah.
on the Charisma 7-inch. The remake in '99 had Gabriel and Collins share the vocals, and the B-side of that, I think, was a CD single. The B-sides were Turn It On Again and Follow You, Follow Me.
Yeah.
So,
These compilations, like the new one too. I see some people complaining, Genesis fans complaining, "Oh, we don't need another best of." I'm like, I know, but like the thing is that you got to remember it's not just for us. There's different generations and new fans, and so one of the cool things about it, at least, I mean, I would actually complain. I'm not a complainer, but like I would complain if they only had the more recent, still 20 something years ago, hits and didn't have any of the old stuff. Then I'd be like, oh, come on, you
yeah.
can't ignore the legacy of this band. It's so diverse. But they didn't. They have like it's an odd selection, but they've got, stuff from the Gabriel era, stuff from, 70s with Phil and different things. And so just the idea that they're doing a tour and, even the drummer who's Simon's younger brother, Nick Collins, people, and he's in his teens. So kids his age, probably just discovering it, and the fact that they're going to listen to Dance on a Volcano or whatever's on there and go, oh my God, what's this? And discover the back catalog is kind of, to me, it's like, well, that's what that's about. And it's also about merch, and it's also about making money or recouping money, and that's totally fine too.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, some people, you can't please everybody, especially these days. Everyone's got a problem with something.
Yeah.
So Turn It On Again, the hits, was also like that, and they did the Turn It On Again tour, although I guess that was a little later, but either way, it was kind of like, around that time, well, probably 7-year span or 8-year span. But anyway, they did it around then, and now they're doing it again. But it had this extra bonus track, which to me, I would have loved another bonus track on the new one like that. I mean,
Yeah.
especially with them reuniting.
Of course.
But some people were complaining about that because like I don't want to buy a CD just for one song. You know, like so this like you don't have to buy it. There's not one song for you to buy.
Right.
Personally, I don't mind buying a CD for that song. I'll buy the CD, $10, $15. I'll buy it, no problem. Give me a song with Gabriel and Phil on it. I'll pay 10 times the price.
Yeah, well, not less than extortionate prices.
Exactly.
Yeah, the thing is that when people say, "Oh, we don't need another compilation," what they really mean is, "I'm a completist and I buy everything, and now I got to go buy a thing, and I'm not getting any new music out
That's
of it."
their problem.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's their problem. And I mean, I do it. I bought the Turn It On Again, the hits. I bought the Turn It On Again, the hits tour edition at the show in 2007. And I bought the 14 of our best from Starbucks. I don't drink coffee. I went to a Starbucks just to get this thing.
There you go.
So
I'm probably not going to buy this new compilation, although it makes a good present on vinyl. And the
yeah,
funniest thing is, a friend of mine named Alejandro is a huge Genesis fan, and it was my birthday recently, and he was out of town at the time, and he just gave me his present. And you know what it was? One of the presents?
what's that?
Duke, the white vinyl.
I have that. It's
That's
awesome.
Yeah, that's totally cool. I don't have a very good vinyl collection, but I've got a few things, and that's like special. I love Duke.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, at this point, all of those songs can be streamed through streaming services anyway. So it's more like of a novelty to own the CD or the vinyl, and it's just
Mhm.
something to buy, like a T-shirt or whatever. Like you said, you collect everything, and so I mean, but at the same time, I get it. I don't, personally, I would like if there was something new, like a little twist.
Sure.
Some people were saying, "Hey, it says new stereo mixes," and I verified that there's no new stereo mixes. They were just called that sometimes.
Mhm.
So there's nothing, as far as I know, there's nothing new. It's a compilation. I could be wrong, but
So the
I
new mixes could be just it's what they called them when Nick Davis redid them for the box sets.
yeah, that's probably what they are.
Yeah.
Like 99%.
Yeah. So I mean, but that yeah, you're right. I mean, I probably will get it just to have the title because I haven't used it. I am a bit of a
You're
completist,
completed.
and they're my favorite band. So of
Good.
course, and
Why
and
not?
and
What
why
else
not
would
get it?
you buy?
And I only have Duke on vinyl because I just started, getting back into vinyl earlier this year for the first time in many years.
So you're
So
gonna get the new one on vinyl?
yeah, so I'll get the new one on vinyl.
Good for you. I might too.
It's good. It's good to throw on there and listen to anyway.
Why not?
Um, so yeah, it was Carpet Crawlers. Obviously, is a standout track on side two, and probably my favorite on side two. Although I have a really soft spot for Hairless Heart. I think that's really underrated
Yeah.
for all the reasons that you pointed out earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
Side three kicks off again another kind of rocker with Lily White Lilith, as Chamber of 32 Doors kind of quietly fades out at the end, and then boom, you put on second record, and they're in your face again. These guys.
Yeah. That's their version of the Who.
Yeah, sure. And then the weirdness starts
Oh
with
yeah.
the waiting room. Um, I have to admit, the first half of the song doesn't do a lot for me, even today. But I love the back half of this song.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the first half, like I said, is their version of like a Revolution number 9. Um, possibly filler, what some could say, but I think it's cool. And in context, it makes sense, and it really kind of sets the tone for you're now going deep into the rabbit hole at this point. Like, the first two sides were like, songs that you could really kind of, mostly except for like the segue songs, like
Hmm.
instrumental bits and stuff, Hairless Heart and things. But this is like, all right, we're getting into the story here, we're getting into the atmosphere, and then of course, like you said, in the second half, they come in with a little, probably was an improvised jam, a little more loose than normal, the Evil Jam or whatever. And it was cool because when it was live, it was different every time too. It was one of the few moments where they had like a Grateful Dead Space Jam, you know, anything could happen. And with Genesis, as great as they are, is kind of they're one of my all-time favorite bands. And it's kind of like, you know, as awesome as it is what I said earlier about probably mostly to do with Tony Banks and his strictness of like, you know, his standard that he had back then of like wanting to perfect it and revise compositions and get things to be like, you know, more so than almost any other keyboard playing songwriter that I knew that I know of from that time, where he would be like, no, like it's composed. That was like a moment where he was like, all right, fine, we'll let loose. Not
Yeah.
that it was to him, but they all decided whoever decided these things. And then when you hear that, you're like, I think like, it's like, oh, they should have done more of that too, though. You know, because it's like they're awesome doing that, especially Phil. I mean, that guy, Phil Collins, just, you know, brilliant, you
Yeah.
know, on a level that's just, you know, yes, he had this huge pop success, but as a drummer and the musicality of the way he thought about what he did is just its own thing, and there's no one else compares.
Yeah.
Other people were great in their own right, like Bill Bruford and, you know, Neil Peart and other people, but Phil did his thing, and when they allowed him to just kind of do his thing, like even with Brand X, he kind of had more room to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But Brand X didn't have the melodic elements that Genesis had, so even in a jam. But like that jam, when that starts to come in, you're like, da, 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 da. It was just, yeah, it's awesome. And the kind of thing you're like, all right, give me a 20-minute jam of this live.
It just goes to show you that Tony, when he let his hair down, it was those moments were great. And you know, he's very proper English, very kind of stodgy almost, and you know, he is who he is. That's great. But yeah, whenever he let his hair down, that was pretty awesome too. Um, so you go from the waiting room to Anyway, which, you know, it's just a couple of short pieces anyway, and here comes the Supernatural Anesthetist, which is a real mouthful. You don't see titles like that very often. Then the Lamia, you talked about that earlier, and Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats, and the Lamia really here on side 3 is the centerpiece.
Yeah, and all those other pieces are just gorgeous. You know, Silent Sorrow is just one of the most beautiful uses of mellotronic choir I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
Yeah.
I love that song,
Yeah.
and I love all of it. Anyway, it's great as well, you know. And yeah, like side 3 and 4 has some of the more deep cut, obscure tracks, but that's really where you get more of a feeling of the journey in a picaresque cinematic way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially because you have those instrumental interludes, and then you've got
Yeah.
these songs that kind of are a little, no, the other songs are descriptive, but like the Carpet Crawlers, not even sure what Carpet Crawlers really are exactly. But like, you know, you start to hear a bit more about Rail and the Lamia, you know, and that whole thing. And then eventually, you know, side 4, all the stuff that happens there, even if I don't fully understand that either. But there's just, it's more descriptive of the journey and of Rail, what he's going through and stuff, from on side 3 and side 4.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to be in New York City anymore here.
No.
I really love lyrically some of the stuff on side 3 a lot. I love the just the term Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats. I like the what is the line from Anyway where Peter sings something about they say she comes in on a pale horse, but I'm sure I hear a train. Just really cool lyrically.
Yeah. Now that's the thing, by the way, about them too, with Gabriel in general and that album. There's little gems. And I like little gems. You're like, I don't know exactly what it's talking about. I don't need to know, but I like this, the way it just kind of conjures up things. Just the line, even out of the song context.
Mm-hmm.
It's some real beauts. And by the way, I forgot to mention, this is kind of a big thing. I mean, not really, but just in terms of interpretation. As I was listening to all these Genesis tracks recently, including The Lamb, and sort of just giving a different perspective on it, besides just the keyboards and thinking about that stuff. I was just sort of listening to it and thinking like, oh, well, because I watched somebody had done a animation, their own animation.
Right. Yeah, that came out
Great
recently.
effort.
Yeah.
I wouldn't visualize a lot of the things that were there as what I would do, but just the fact that someone was so passionate to do that, and it's sort of, and it has the lyrics as well, so it's kind of fun. It's a fun ride,
Yeah.
and that's on YouTube. And then I was just sort of, and I was watching, I was thinking about it, at least the title track. I was thinking like, and again, I'm not like a super fan that has read all the interviews and knows all. The other fans are like, well, Peter Gabriel said himself that, it's not about that, Dave. I'm like, well, whatever. But that I wonder if like, in some ways is kind of like, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy's knocked out and possibly imagines this whole crazy world, right?
Right.
So he's sort of like this, punk aerosol kid, gangster, and does drugs or is drunk and like the lamb lies down on Broadway. Like he's passed out in the street and has this crazy dream. And in a way that sort of justifies all the wackiness. Like anything can happen, nightmares or dreams, they can be, anything can happen.
Yeah.
So sort of like, yeah, I sort of pictured it maybe in the context of like, this dude is just kind of like having an acid trip, or super drunk and passed out on Broadway.
Yeah.
And he's the lamb. And then he sort of has all this metaphor and everything. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they were like on tour and Gabriel was wasted one night and he just sort of like curled up like a little lamb. He's like, hey, wait a minute, I got an idea.
Yeah, I think as an artist, you are well aware that once you put your work out in the world, it's not yours anymore. It's really up to the listener to figure out what it means to them. And like I've interviewed people who they don't even want to tell you what they were thinking about when they wrote the song, because that's not important to them. They are more interested in what the listener thinks about it. So
I like both. I like
yeah.
to know what the songwriter was thinking, and I can still separate my own
Yeah.
interpretation. But I respect that as
Yeah.
well.
I do too. When I'm interviewing them, I'm like, no, I really want to know what the song's about. No, really, please tell me.
You want to know even more when they won't tell you.
Yeah. It's like, and then you wonder, is it just, well, I don't know, it just sounded good, so I wrote it. But
You want to hear something funny though? When we did, I'll just interlude this because it's all the related stuff. So when we played the Lamb at Prague Fest in '94, and the audience loved it, and we were like a last minute addition, and we had only like a week to learn it. It was insane. It's probably the hardest gig I'd done, maybe ever. And learning the Lamb, I mean, you think you know it, but then you have to sit there. I don't play in a tribute band, so I had to learn it. They helped me. Kevin and Stan helped me. Anyway, after we were done, the crowd went nuts, and it was just it was an epic experience. It was amazing. And then I walked off stage, and the security guard said, "Oh my God, I love it. Where can I get your album?" Our album. You need to look in the Genesis section.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think for a while that giraffe set was like a really sought after bootleg, but then it got like a Kevin Gilbert estate release.
Yeah, that's because I had suggested it. What happened was I was talking to John Rubin, who was our manager when I played with Kevin. I played in his band Thud, and he manages the estate. And he knows that I know Genesis, and we were talking about getting the rights and this and that. And I'm like, well, I don't think it'd be that easy to get the sync rights for the video, because that you have to negotiate. But the music, you can really just release it and pay the mechanical royalties. Anybody can do a cover in audio. It's the video that's the problem. So they did.
Yeah.
Well, and I have a copy of it.
It's great. The you mentioned YouTube earlier, the with the animated thing. And you also talked about these older songs reaching a new generation. And I think one of the best things about YouTube are these reaction videos. I don't know if you're familiar with them, where somebody listens to that "In the Air Tonight" by Phil Collins for the first time, and that drum fill comes in, and they're just like, whoa, just seeing their reaction is pretty cool. So it is reaching a whole new audience. And YouTube has been responsible for a lot of that. So that's pretty cool. Sometimes I wonder how authentic some of those reaction videos are, but
I don't really watch those. I tried to watch one with some classical guy listening to Supper's Ready, and I just didn't get past the intro. I was just kind of like, I don't need to see this. Whatever. He goes,
yeah.
but it's, I mean, it's kind of funny. So I've seen some where, you see even like someone from a completely different genre checking out, like a rapper listening to Genesis, something like that, but a sophisticated, let's say, hip hop artist who appreciates musicianship and stuff, and going,
hmm
damn. So I mean, it's, in general, let's just say, I love the fact that new people are constantly being turned on to, such great music. That
hmm
said, it's a double-edged sword, because YouTube is partially responsible for the demise of the music industry, because people just expect to just hear stuff for free and see stuff for
Yeah.
free. So it's bittersweet for me in that sense. But overall, in terms of, let's say, music appreciation, that's the benefit.
hmm So side four starts off with the colony of Slippermen, and again, I'm not big on the first part of it, the arrival, but once you get into a visit to the doctor and the Raven, boy, that song just kicks in and really smacks you in the face a little bit.
Yeah, the arrival is a little bit sort of just like,
Weirdness and strange
entering around with,
sounds.
fixing your instruments. Um, but it's cool. But then once they get into bobbity bob business, that song, by the way, is very hard to play. And uh, there's what Tony's doing there in certain parts of it is he's playing two arpeggios at the same time. One of them is doing four notes, and the other one is doing three notes. And I think it's um, so when we played it, Kevin was an amazing musician, could play all the instruments and everything, but he couldn't play that. And he's like, how can you play it? Why, how are you able to count that? And I said, I'm not counting. I'm able to play it because I know what it's supposed to sound like and feel like.
hmm
And that's sort of, I mean, because if you really were to count it, it's like, I don't know if it's two time signatures at the same time. I don't know enough theory to be able to describe it,
Yeah.
but it's weird. And the other thing is he's playing notes throughout the whole song. And when I played it, I realized I had an itch on my nose. These are the kinds of things you don't think about until you really play some like prog where you've got the hands on both, and I'm like, what do I do if I have an itch on my nose? So there's actually a mistake in the keyboard solo on the arp, because I went, and I just kind of just tried to and there's one note, and I'm like, damn it, and, something like that. But anyway, that song is very proggy actually because of that. There's a lot of great playing, and killer drums with the ghost notes and stuff, and quirky arp solo, but that he's made iconic even in the Cage solo. Yeah, and then so this you haven't gotten to riding the scree yet, though.
Not yet. Not yet. But yeah, and Peter does some different characters here. He sings in different voices, and of course that was the thing where he kind of drove his bandmates a little bit nuts in the live shows because he couldn't get the microphone near his mouth, and like,
Actually, I'll tell you something funny. Again, I'm sorry to make this about us, but it's just kind of like, it just so happens that I have this history of a taste of what it would be like. And so one of the, I mean, it must have been something like this, I would imagine. I had never asked them. I should ask them, or maybe they said in an interview. I think they did. What it must have been like to see Gabriel in that costume for the first time, and if they really knew, like that you saw him like messing around with balloons or something, and what's that? Like, or if he just popped in. So this is what Kevin did. We were rehearsing it, and he didn't tell us he was doing that, and we were in the middle of playing it, and then he comes over and he's like, he has the Slipperman face and a few other things, and it was so hard to play and not laugh. I was like, oh my God, like he really pulled one on us. And then it made me think, Gabriel must have been like a combination of hilarious and probably frustrating and just like eye rolling. And then I mean, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the personality. If I
Yeah.
was in the band, I'd probably be cracking up
Yeah.
like you're nuts, dude.
I
But
imagine
you know, I
so.
don't
I
think Tony
imagine
Bennett
Tony
would.
was the one who, when he comes out with a fox head or a box on his head or what, bat wings, he's like, "Oh, we're a rock band. What are you doing?"
Well, or I think Tony, for all the and for all fairness too, for the effort that he put in, especially in composition and everything else, that made the band really more than just a novelty. It was a musical, brilliant thing going on,
Hmm.
that people would only talk about the Foxhead gimmick and not about the music and things like that. And that's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I think, and they all said sort of like by the time he had done the Slipper Man, it was like more costume than practical in terms of singing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as a fan, brilliant. I would love to have seen even a video of the Lamb, let alone actually. So you talk to people who have been there and saw it, and to see that whole thing, and then see that, and also this thing that was twirling around. I don't know what song that was, but it sounds like an incredible show. And that to me was like just a fun aspect of Genesis, this kind of theatrical thing. And it was, no one else has done anything like that, especially the Slipperman.
Yeah. You see these little tiny clips of grainy film from some of those shows, but that's the shame of it, that there's not a complete professionally filmed Lamb show.
Yeah.
And then all the talk about the reunion in 2000, prior to 2007's tour, was, why don't we get together and do the Lamb? Like, we never got to properly do it and film it. And then Peter couldn't do it, and then Steve was out, and then it was just the trio again. So it is frustrating, but I'll keep going. I'm going to see them on this next tour in December. I have to fly up north because they're not coming down here, but
Yeah, me
do
too.
what you do. You got to do what you got to do. So Ravine is next, and then we go to the light dies down on Broadway. A little bit of a reprise to some extent. Riding the Street in the Rapids and It. And this is where I just completely stop even trying to follow any semblance of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. If anything, actually, interestingly, I love it. I love all the songs.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very strange way to wrap the whole album, especially like with that whole "It's only knock and know all," and I like what. Like that almost sounds like they didn't finish it, and he's like, "Well, whatever, it's rock and roll, knock and know all." I mean, it's like, I mean, I wonder. I don't even want to know though. To me, it's just like okay. And then the way they ended it live was terrible because it's supposed to fade out, and the fade out's nice on the album, but
Mm-hmm.
then they did this kind of like Vegasy thing from the recordings of it, like da 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 da. Like,
Yeah.
that's the ending. The king. This is a band that had the best endings ever. These big, like classical endings, and they ended it with this weirdness. But so when we did it, actually, we did something else that they did, which later on, which is segue into Watcher of the Skies, because it has the same chords more or less as the intro of Watcher of the Skies. And so on Three Sides Live, the fourth side, which was released in the UK, I guess, or elsewhere, Europe, but not in the United States, where they had the studio tracks. That's why it was called Three Sides Live.
Yeah.
But that had its beautiful version. I love that version of it / Watch of the Skies with Bill Bruford on drums, who killed it.
Yeah.
And that segue where the audience is discovering that it's Watcher of the Skies, that was my suggestion to Giraffe with Kevin. I was like, we got to do that. And it's a better ending than their ending anyway. It's like you think it's over and like, wait a minute, are they doing? They are doing. Oh my god! And it was just a great Genesis kind of like thing to do, where like you do a medley and you go into a song you weren't expecting to hear.
Yeah.
But getting back to what you're saying, I agree. I mean, it's kind of like, look, I think you take it with a grain of salt. To me, like it's Genesis and it's Gabriel weirdness, and
Yeah.
it's okay. It's just an epic album, beautiful songs, a story that you can make your own sort of interpretation of, and you probably aren't going to be close to what he really was thinking, but that's okay. and you just kind of, there's something with, in the Rapids with, um, and riding the scree with the brother John thing, and he keeps crying out for help, and maybe it was really him all this time, and there's some metaphor there or whatever that you could take from it. But either way, the music is great. The keyboard solo for riding the scree is incredible. Um,
Yeah.
Really cool, and the drums and everything, and those ballads are a little bit slow. They're a little slow, actually. It's a little draggy act in some ways, you could say, uh, because they kind of almost like they ran out of steam a little bit by that point.
Yeah.
The first two sides are like, intense, and now they're kind of like, as the one. It's like, wow, all right, but I love it anyway.
Yeah.
It's just, you have to kind of be maybe in the mood. But like it's almost like, and I don't know if this is true, but you probably don't listen to side 3 and 4 if you weren't just doing the whole album experience. Whereas you could listen to In the Cage, or
Yeah.
side 1 on its own, or side 2, side 1 and 2 maybe, without the whole thing. But 3 and 4, like, I don't know if anyone just goes in to listen to 3 and then out.
Yeah.
Or
That's a good
4
point.
even. It's
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because even when I used to do my radio show, I would do tracks from the album, and it never felt right to hear a song out of context. Like, you didn't have the preliminary song that led into it. You didn't have the next song that that it led into, and it always felt a little weird that way. It always felt more cohesive when you listen to it start to finish. So I hear what you're saying. One of the things I love about side 4, though, other than Colony of Slippermen, is I like In the Rapids a lot, and there's not much to it, but I just feel like Peter gets really emotive in his vocals on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, he does, throughout the album, great vocal performance. Some of the best Peter Gabriel vocals ever, maybe. So much variety, and so much, so many different timbres, and his gravelly sound, and his kind of soulful sound, and and a little more, kind of like mature, in that, not that it was immature before, but he was sort of, he's an interesting artist, because he's always kind of evolved and done different things that you don't expect, and very creative, vocally and lyrically and stuff. So, but it seemed like that album actually sort of created a bit of a template for Phil, in a way, because like some of the edginess of his vocal and certain soulful things, whereas before that, I mean, it depends, but like some of the stuff was like, let's say Battle of Epping Forest, whatever, that was maybe a template for Fish. It sounds like Fish from Marillion got a lot of ideas and inspiration from that. But like Phil, Carpet Crawlers and The Lamb and In the Cage, anytime he kind of got aggressive with later Genesis, it seemed to be, but all of it, Cinema Show and Supper's Ready, but and he sang with Peter too, so it wasn't like it was completely like, but he just, I don't know, for some reason The Lamb kind of reached there's a lot of vocal stylings on The Lamb that did carry forward with both Peter Gabriel and his solo stuff, and also like Moribund the Burgermeister and some of those kind of songs, and then with Phil, on various tracks.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our songs. The needle hits the run out groove here, and
now it was important that we did this in real time, so the interview is as long as the album.
Yeah,
you can listen to the album while we're talking, and it ends. Just like Wizard of Oz. If you play Wizard of Oz also, it'll end right now.
It's a director's commentary, right? So, how often do you listen to this album? You must listen to it at least once a year.
Oh, no. Are you kidding? once a month, probably at least.
Okay.
Yeah, I never get tired of Genesis, old Genesis. My favorite era is from Trespass to Abacab. Not that I like everything on those albums, and then after
Hmm.
that, it's hit and miss. I do
Fair.
like albums up to even the last one, but
Yeah.
uh, but but yeah. So I'll put up on any of those albums, and like I said, recently I've been listening to it a lot, just to kind of refamiliarize myself and listen to it differently. But yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know if I listen to it once a month, but I don't. It's not like I'm not a regular, like, okay, I'm gonna, do anything habitually or whatever. But if I'm in the mood, I'll put it on without hesitation. And especially, here in the studio, uh, I do everything. So, I mean, I do the wiring and I do the unfun stuff. I do the fun stuff, like music and do mixing and all that. But then
Yeah.
I go behind these things and do the wiring and all that stuff, and I'll put on an album or two,
Yeah.
while I'm doing it.
So I imagine this is one that you listen to it either all the way through or from the beginning to however long it takes you to do whatever task you're doing.
If you're driving,
Yeah.
but I could also just leave it on and then just dip in and out or whatever. I
Hmm.
mean, there's the, and this is, rare, but like nice when you just have time to just sit and listen. And at that point, if you really have the setup, I cannot recommend highly enough a surround sound system of any kind, of any
Yeah.
level, even just having the speakers positioned and putting on the box set versions. Then you're really immersed in the album, and that's
Hmm.
incredible. And I haven't had enough time to just sit and do that, but I have the setup to do that, so that's the kind of thing I would do and will do when I kind of get caught up on some of the mixing work I have to do and some things. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, in the car, on your earphones, if you're working out, I mean,
Mhm.
this is the kind of stuff that just, to me, it never gets old.
Yeah. This is the version with the 5.1.
Nice.
So I can vouch for the 5.1 surround version. It's really good. Um, so I'm really looking forward to your version when it comes out. So you say it's going to probably be out this year?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little secret. This, I don't think I've told this. I might as well tell it. If I was ever going to tell it, it's when we're talking about the Lamb. So I'm really into like adding something extra when we do these tributes. We did a tribute to Yes, we did a tribute to Rush, and Genesis is one of my favorite bands. So we're going all out, and there are some surprises. Well, I'm going to ruin the surprise, but there's some bonus tracks and stuff. One of the surprises I already ruined, which is I'm going to do some original songs, which are songs I've already released of mine, either with Sound of Contact or In Continuum or my solo stuff, and but replace the keyboards with Tony's keys just for fun. And I'll pick songs that were kind of heavily influenced by Genesis or even had Steve Hackett already as a guest, and I'll just go for it as a novelty. It's just for fun, just to be like, all right, this is what it would sound like if it was the full on, really the, all of Tony's keys, actual keys.
Uh-huh.
But the other thing, and this no one knows, I haven't said it until now, but it's just kind of a fun thing to do, might as well, is there were these tapes circulating around that you can hear on YouTube actually of outtakes from the Lamb, of them jamming and stuff. But unfortunately, it sounds like a tape that has been like put in the washing machine and is just muffled or whatever, but you can hear it.
Hmm.
So Martin Levac and I think Matt Dorsey and a few other people from Sound of Contact and we redid some of the jams, some of the outtakes, and Steve might even play on those as well. Steve, so like there's bonus tracks that are almost like never heard outtakes that we'll never hear because they weren't recorded well enough, at least as far as I know. So there's even some bonus tracks that are like songs that might have been on the Lamb from
Yeah.
them.
Awesome. That sounds good. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I hope it comes out fairly soon because I'm interested in hearing it. So you got me my interest peaked. Um, Dave, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, most of the albums that I produce, and the tribute albums, as well as my solo albums and continuum albums, and even Mancha Vega, are on sonicelements.bandcamp.com. I love Bandcamp. It's called Sonic Elements. It's kind of like my label out of Sonic Reality. It's the music label.
Hmm.
Um, And but you know, you can find some of it on iTunes and Amazon, and some of it on, even a little bit of it on streaming services,
Hmm.
even though I'm not a big fan. And you can see it on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/Dave Kerzner, you see some there. If you go to In Continuum Band, you can see that. Sound of Contact is through Inside Out Records, so you could just search Sound of Contact. It's only one album, Dimension,
Hmm.
with Simon Collins. And Arc of Life is on Frontiers, so you could seek that out. I need to do like a updated discography so that people can kind of, if they're really interested. It's just I don't spend a lot of time on that, but I need to think about that. But like I'm a one man, like I just kind of everything's kind of homegrown. I mean, I have some label deals, but like a lot of stuff is just I just do it myself, release it
Yeah.
myself in
Yeah.
Bandcamp, and my priorities are really just the music itself and trying to do like the best I can with the production and the mixing and that kind of stuff. And then so like the sort of retrospective of, oh, you know, what have I done? Like, you know, like I don't know, like gosh, going back. I mean, it was cool doing this CD called Breakdown for a label, Cherry Red. They had asked me to kind of catch people up. I went all the way back to the 90s and did one of Kevin's songs, Joytown, for that. And then thinking like, gosh, some people, they don't even know about that. Maybe they know about Sound of Contact, they don't know about In Continuum, or they don't know about Kevin Gilbert. And there's a lot, so it is kind of on me to help sort of show people, because I'm really proud of the different projects I've been part of, and I
Hmm.
think they kind of relate. Like I think if you like Genesis, then, and maybe people who like the Genesis tribute that we do, so all this stuff, and then they'll check out Sound of Contact because it's got Phil Collins' son on it, maybe, and then they go, wow, I really like this, and then go, this, you know, Dave guy, what's the deal? And then they check out Kevin Gilbert and they see his Genesis influences and how he took it in new way directions, or the way we did the Lamb. And then check out Nick DiVirgilio and his solo stuff and Spock Spirit. And it's like there's like a family tree of prog music to
Yeah.
discover that's not that far from Genesis in terms of, it's, you know, Big Train. If you like uh, Nick DiVirgilio, he drums great with them, and
Yeah.
they sound,
Fantastic band. Excellent
yeah,
band.
they're
Yeah.
great. So it's all kind of, you know, interrelated.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're talking to Simon Collins. I know you've done the one Sound of Contact album. You've worked with Simon on his solo albums. What context are you talking to Simon? Is there maybe a second Sound of Contact coming at some point?
Nothing really concretely planned. Just there's been some talk. We obviously tried to do that, and then it just didn't, you know, look like it was going to happen. So we all agreed to just release our own songs. I created a whole project because I had a lot of songs. I was a big part of the songwriting for Sound of Contact. So both on Dimension Odd and what would have been the second album. So I released pretty much all of those songs already now that were supposed to be for the first, so for the second album. I
Hmm.
have a bunch of songs that we jammed on but never did for Dimension Odd, and you know, they could be a Sound of Contact album, but I ended up recording them with the In Continuum guys, and that's the one that I'm sort of deciding between whether it's going to be In Continuum or a solo album.
Hmm.
And there's a couple songs with Simon already playing on it that he would be cool with guesting on, using those tracks, but probably more if I did it as a Dave Kerzner solo album than if I did In Continuum, because he just doesn't want people to be confused, and I don't blame him. You know, because In Continuum is kind of like, was created as a home for my Sound of Contact songs without it
Hmm.
being Sound of Contact. I could have just called it Sound of Contact. I mean, when he and Kelly quit, Matt was like, you know, we're Sound of Contact. We could just be Sound of Contact. And I'm like, you know, man, every time a band does that, there's so much, you know, controversy. There's people who
Yeah.
hate you for it. And I'm
Drama. There's
like,
baggage. You don't need that.
yeah, I'm like, whatever. And the irony is that, you know, I'm sure it would have sold more as Sound of Contact, but for me, fortunately, I'm really not in it for the money. I mean, I want to be successful and it costs money, so I want to make money. I'm not saying I'm, you know, it's a charity situation here, but like my main motivation is just to be authentic, to do what I love, to put it out there for people to love it, not to give them a reason to hate me and go, Dave, who does he think he is? He's not Sound of Contact. I'm like, well, I'm a big part of it, but I agree. I don't really want to do a Sound of Contact album without Simon,
Yeah.
really, you know. So, but at the same time, uh, I don't want to get into the details, but we just haven't been able to do it, and we don't all work the same way with the same kind of, I don't know, drive or same kind of methods.
Hmm.
And the way to do it would be remotely, but that's just not, we've never done that. So I think the way we did Dimension on was an ideal, where you have different people from around the world coming to one place. I mean, I gave up like half a year to be in Vancouver to do that record.
Yeah.
I can't do that again. That cost me a fortune, but it was worth it. But to do it now, I've got my own studio. I didn't have it like that then. We could produce it ourselves and it would sound fantastic. But you know, uh, with the pandemic, so I think we all love each other. We're all friends. So I think we all appreciate, we all get it. We understand people love it and we love it too. So there's
Hmm.
nothing really preventing it from possibly happening in terms of, in theory, or in terms of like we like each other. There's no like animosity or any of that stuff. And any of the issues that we did have some. We're water under the bridge. This life's too short to have any. We've ironed that out.
Yeah.
But
Good.
yeah. Anyway, long-winded way of saying not right now, but maybe.
Not right now. Yeah. Well, I hear you what you're saying about the not, that you want to make money. You got to pay off those credit cards after buying all those keyboards.
Yeah, well, I wasn't expecting to do that with music. I have other equipment that I'm selling. Ironically, I had an Art Quadra, and I sold that to a band called Genetics, which is a great tribute band in Argentina. And then I got Tony's. So it's like, all right, well, so there's a few things. I'm selling a Mellotron, and I got Tony's Mellotron. I'm selling other things, anything. And over time, I'll be able to pay off the loan to get. I had to get it. It was one of those things. It was like,
Oh
all
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
I have to do this. This is a dream come true for me as a keyboard player and as a Tony Banks fan. You know, growing up watching him play those keyboards and wanting to buy the same brands. Now I own the actual ones. It's insane,
Yeah.
but you know, it's worth it, obviously. And I'm just gonna. I mean, people are very supportive. They kind of who know what I'm trying to do. It's a different thing. Like even though the industry is imploding or whatever, people, when I put out stuff, they'll pay like for the deluxe editions and all these things and extra stuff. They enjoy it as I do, those
Hmm.
kind of things. But also they see that I'm trying to like, continue something cool that we all like, that really makes less and less business sense, but it's still something we love. So
Yeah.
someone's got to do it anyway. And fortunately, I'm like successful enough with my music industry, the music instrument industry and stuff with Sonic Reality and IK, successful enough to be able to, as a day job, to essentially do what I do for the love of it and the art of it,
Yeah.
and people buy it too and support it. So it's just kind of enough to keep it going and not give up on the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think like the Genesis tribute probably, and the sample library, I'm doing a sample library of Tony's keyboards. I think actually probably between the sales of those two, it'll help pay off some of that loan. I think so. And if not, then I still do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I wish you luck with it. It's obviously a once in a lifetime opportunity for you. You had to go for it, so can't blame you. Dave Kerzner, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. I appreciate you coming on and talking about The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, classic album. I've enjoyed this. I hope you've had a good time, and hope to have you again on again sometime.
All right. Thank you, Michael.